I've been meaning to make this video for a while now. When I first started getting into 3D printing, it was always a dream of mine to be able to print with color. The technology has improved drastically since then. Over the past years, I've done a handful of full color test prints with some interesting results. I'm going to break down the pros and cons of each method I've tried, as well as compare them with painted gray resin prints. We're going to go in chronological order of when each color piece was first printed. This first set of monster sculpts were my first attempt at full color. The material is sandstone. The second one is the same model printed at home in gray resin. I believe it was on the Elegoo Mars 1. This third print is a much more recent version, shrunk down slightly with some added texture and details. While the best thing I can say about this method is that it is significantly cheaper than other types of full color 3D printing, there are a lot of drawbacks when it comes to working with this material. Firstly, even though it is the cheaper option, it is still far more expensive than the typical gray resin print. The next big drawback is the resolution of the prints. Very thick layer heights mean little to no tiny details are captured, and the finish kind of has a grainy texture on the outside. And the last drawback is that it soaks up moisture. This print in particular has a glossy coat that helps seal the print from moisture seeping into it, but that is only so effective. An uncoated model is even worse off. So if you were to use a model printed in sandstone as a tabletop miniature, even if you manage to keep it dry, over time with repeated use, the sweat and oils on our hands will begin to break it down. These next set of prints are of this little goblin guy. The full color printing method I used for this one was multicolored resin. Next to this one I have the same model in a different pose printed in gray resin about the same size. And finally I have the same model printed at 28mm scale. So there's lots to say about these prints. Definitely a huge improvement in resolution from the sandstone prints. The details are much sharper and the finish is very smooth. I would compare the resolution to an at-home resin printer, as good if not better. Also, much better at dealing with moisture. I don't see any issues with this getting wet. The real drawback with this type of material is the cost. Printing in this material is very expensive. Not practical if you want to print an army this way. And while the resolution of the print is an improvement, I still feel like the color is lagging behind what can be done with paint. If we look at the face of the goblin, for example, if I were to shrink this down to a tabletop scale, you could tell that almost none of the detail would come through. These are the last set of prints I wanted to show, Pickle's Cage. I wanted to show these for several reasons. The color print was done using the same multicolored resin printing as the goblin model. The major difference with this one is that the texture map for this one is an actual texture of a pickle, whereas the goblin's texture was just hand painted in software. I also have some gray resin prints I hand painted in acrylic to compare it to. For me, the texture from an image just doesn't look as good as the hand painted version. Something just didn't translate over and the colors seem off to me. Also, for whatever reason, I believe because of the shape of the pickle, the layer lines are much more apparent. Some other factors to consider in general with full color 3D printing versus printing in gray resin and painting. The time factor. If you need a model right away, it can take a long time to design, upload, have it printed, and shipped to you. It can take up to several weeks. Printing at home, most models are done the same day as you send them to print. The consistency factor. Once you have the color print set up properly, you can print as many as you like, assuming you can afford them, and you know each copy will be identical to the last. Hand painting at home, no matter how careful you are, each one you paint will be unique. This might be an advantage or disadvantage depending on your perspective. The iterative factor. If you are a designer and you get your full color print in the mail and want to make changes, it can be a daunting task, considering the cost and amount of time to get it just how you want it. I could definitely send this pickle print back to the printers with some color correction and some gloss baked into the texture map, and I think it would be an improvement, but I don't know for sure until I see it in my hand. And would it be worth the time and money to keep iterating on it until it was in a more acceptable state? I don't know. Something to think about. The last thing to mention is the workflow issues with full color printing. In order to print in color, when you send the model to the printer, it needs to have UVs and a texture map associated with it. If you are familiar with the design process for standard gray resin printing, then you know that when you are finished sculpting a model, you usually run it through a process called decimation. This drastically reduces the poly count on the model without having to sacrifice surface detail. The problem with this is that it destroys the UV and texture map. So the question is, how do I maintain the details of my sculpt while also holding onto the UV and texture map? There are several ways to go about this, but they are tricky and time consuming depending on the complexities of your model. If you would like me to go over my full color workflow in a different video, let me know in the comments below. So while a lot of this must come across as critical, that was not my intention for this video. While my review of the current state of color printing might come across as negative, I actually think the technology is amazing, and that it's kind of miraculous that we have it at all. I think the future is very bright. In a short time, the technology has improved drastically. I'm really excited to see what comes out in the next few years. I think color printing will become affordable enough to do at home, and there will be more widespread adoption. Just a few short years ago, most resin printers were too expensive for at-home enthusiasts, and now they're everywhere and very affordable. So I think it's quite likely we'll see the same thing happen to color printing, as well as a variety of other crazy features. Until then, I think that it is still more advantageous to print and paint at home. But that's just one man's opinion. Maybe you're uncomfortable with the smell of resin, or you're not happy with your painting skills. Then the cost of the full color print might be more justified for you. What do you guys think? Are you interested in this type of printing? Have you ever ordered a model in any of these materials before? Is the price point too high for you? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching.